Thanks for checking out this episode of the Always Forward podcast. This community exists for everyone, whether you're an elite athlete, fitness enthusiast, business owner, leader, student, parent, or pretty much anything else. This content is for you. What unifies our listeners is a passion to improve themselves in order to impact the world. Make sure to check out our website and follow us on Instagram for more content like workouts, previous episodes, and articles. Also, make sure to visit our online store for Always Forward apparel and other merchandise. This episode is a part of our Be More Human series. In this series, we are focusing on different aspects of what it means to be human, how we've strayed from our original design, and helpful ways to take back control of our lives by living with passion and purpose. If you enjoy the episode, take a second to leave us a review and share it with a friend.
Before jumping into the show, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Pursue Outfitters and Tennessee Pre. Check out Pursue Outfitters apparel at pursueoutfitters.com. Check out Tennessee Pre. Unstack your stack with Tennessee Pre. Your focus and energy will be incredible.
All right, back at it. Be More Human series, episode 1.
Season 2.
Season 2 of the Always Forward podcast. It's been a hot second, but back into it. So purposes today is really just to kind of set up the vision for the Be More Human series. So we have a handful of really solid guests that are going to come onto the show, mostly within the CrossFit space, some just kind of in the functional fitness, health space, as well as some outside of that. Just to kind of bring unique perspectives on kind of the different aspects of being human. But ultimately, the vision for this is to really dig into some ways we were particularly designed to be human, and then how we've kind of strayed from that and ways to get back to it. So yeah, just for us today, just to kind of have a general introductory conversation of what does this mean? Like when we say be more human, what do we actually mean? I have, some folks at the gym that are like, what does that mean? I have a 10-year-old niece that's really confused. Like, what do you mean? How can I be more human? And so interesting questions, obviously, and they're fair questions. And so just to provide our insight on kind of what we mean by that. So I figured you could kind of guide us through that conversation.
Perfect.
We'll just go from there.
Yeah, we'll just, we'll start at the top and work down.
Cool.
So when you say human, what do you mean? And not the song, Are We Humans or Are We Dancers?
I don't even know what that song is. But who's that by?
Oh.
Sometimes our age difference shows. Most of the time you can't tell, though.
Most of the time
you're very young. You got a very young spirit, Phil. So, I don't know what that song is, though. But
we're humans.
You want to sing a bit of it?
No, not today.
Yeah, okay. So by human, we really mean outside of flesh and bone, outside of the like natural instinctual living of survival and like what it takes to just operate as a living, breathing organism, the uniqueness of our humanity, like what separates us from the rest of creation that is alive, that lives and breathes as well. And so when we really talk about being human, it's just this like outside of our 5 senses, what else is there that makes us unique? What else is there that provides us the opportunity to do what no other kind of living organism can do, which is more than just survive. We can do more than just eat and sleep and reproduce. Like survival is a low standard, and it's also not very challenging in society anymore. And so really in our efforts to be more human, it's really looking at what we were intended to be from a primal perspective, like upon coming into the world, how we operated, and getting back to that while at the same time evaluating like the reality that human beings are unique in their ability to impress change upon their environment. Does that make sense? Like we can evolve and elevate the world around us, because like the thing that separates us is often like, it's often referred to as just like your prefrontal cortex. Like literally ours is just bigger. And so, but we have the opportunity as human beings for higher reasoning. And so that is most people's theory of like, well, that's really the only difference between us and animals, which, I mean, sure, it is unique and it does provide us that like sense of higher cognitive reasoning, but I think that there's something more to it. I think there's something very unique that makes us humans, and I think we've lost it in the way that we live our lives today, like in our society and our cultures. I think we've become a little less human. We've become a little less unique. We've become a little less impactful. We've become more just a part of our systems and a part of our cultures and a part of our societies, without really giving back to them or changing them places where they need to be changed.
So it's like, I like what you said. It's we change our environments that we come into. It's like walking into a room. Are you just a piece of art that's hanging on the wall, or are you making a difference inside the whole room? Are you coloring outside the lines?
Yeah, for sure. It's like it's that concept of like, as an individual, are you just like taking up space in the world, or are you doing something? And I think that's really what I mean when we press into this concept of like, there's something unique to your humanity. Like, you were created, and like, we obviously have very clear convictions on who we believe created us and why we were created. And I know that that's differing for different people, but we know that we were created for particular and specific impact, but also with particular and specific uniqueness to each one of us. And so like, it's the leaning into that concept and that mentality that you are in so many ways exactly like everyone else in the world, and at the same time in very powerful ways nothing like everyone else in the world. And so there is that unity and uniqueness, I think, that makes us human.
Agreed.
For sure.
Agreed. Well, that's kind of a perfect segue to put this quote
Nice.
that I was talking to Jameson about. It's a quote by Mr. Rogers, Mr. Fred Rogers, if you don't know who he is.
Great. Big sweater guy.
Big sweater guy. Yeah. As human beings, our job in life is to help people realize how rare and valuable each one of us really is. That each of us has something that no one else has or ever will have. Something inside that is unique to all time. And it's just like what you said. It's like, we're all the same, but we are all so uniquely different. And a big testament to me was, my children.
Yeah.
And like, knowing from birth how different they are. They're all the same, right? They all have the same DNA from me and my wife, but they are so vastly different. And it's like, it's an amazing thing.
Yeah. And I imagine that they bring a sense of like unique impact even to your life as well.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, when we talk about being human, one of the things I want to focus a lot on, it's really, I guess, two-part. Like, part one is kind of that like primality of humanity, like the ways in which we've gone soft, not necessarily in terms of like just comfortable living or modern day living, but in ways of how we strayed away from purpose-based living in a sense. And so like really getting back to like the primal nature of our humanity in a lot of ways, and like how do we live into our humanity in kind of a lousy modern world that we live in now, that really does allow us just to kind of like flow in and out without ever really making an impact. So that's part one. And then I think the second part, which is even the more important part, is this idea of to be human is to humanize everyone else. And so it's very timely for where the entire world is at right now. In that, in my opinion, and in watching things unfold, the most inhumane thing you can do is dehumanize another person or another group of people. And so we're facing that clearly with a spotlight on racism right now. And so just because of the events of George Floyd's murder, and then things that have unfolded continually since then. So like the nation has shined a spotlight on that. But we also deal with it even with like the dehumanizing factors of coronavirus at the moment. So like we make it political, or we put agendas to it rather than an opportunity to see it for what it is in the individual lives of people who struggle from it.
That are impacted.
Yeah, impacted
in different ways.
Exactly.
It's not just, I've
sick.
had it.
Right.
Exactly. It's impacted me financially.
Yeah.
It's socially. It's all these avenues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I read something even last night about how the fear of the suicide rate rising due to coronavirus has kind of come to fruition. So like it has now happened to where the number of suicides are higher than the number of deaths due to coronavirus, I suppose, on a sliding scale currently, which, researchers were pointing out at an early stages of this of, hey, whenever this happens and unemployment rises, and like the unemployment rate rises in communities, so does the suicide rate and stuff like
equation.
that. Yeah. And so just even things like that we recognize that impact. And so to be human, I think, means to be able to genuinely step into those environments or step back and take a look at those circumstances and those situations and start looking at it by humanizing the people that are a part of it. I think that connected to like so much of our greatest failures of humanity is the ability to dehumanize a person or a demographic, a group of people. And so it kind of feeds into our always forward mantra and mentality of, first, it's about improving ourselves so that the impact occurs to what's around us. So getting back to the root of like, oh man, let's take hold of that primal nature of our humanity and then realize what that means to the world. Like, what do we do with it at that point?
Yeah. So, I mean, it kind of talks about like, you know, why you see a need for this focus, right? It's like,
yeah,
it kind of talks about that, like,
yeah,
why do we need this right now?
You know, talking about like using circumstances for agendas, I guess it is kind of my agenda at the moment, or the agenda that we've talked about, is to look at these circumstances and lean into trying to make whatever difference we feel like we can make. And so I honestly feel at a loss most of the time for what I am supposed to do actionably to make an impact in what my eyes have been open to. So like the world, it needs help, you know, and like racism is wrong. We're not going to waste time arguing about that. Like dehumanizing people is wrong. Like so much is wrong with what's going on. And so really when we started having these conversations again about spinning the podcast back up, it's like, hey, let's just have conversations about how do we address that? How do we talk a little bit more about like what it means to stand for something, to believe in something, and to stand against something. And let's just talk about it, because at the very least we could do that. We can bring attention, we can shine spotlights on areas, and in the ways that we don't know what to do yet, let's not just tie our hands behind our back. And so one of the ways that for me I feel pretty fired up is that I feel like a pretty root issue of what we face a lot as a culture and as a society is this reality that like people are just like mindlessly floating through their lives without a deep sense of core values or conviction. They don't like stand for anything, and they just kind of morph in and out of,
and they don't stand against anything
Yeah,
either. I think that's
absolutely.
another thing to kind of point out. It's like, it's okay. Like sometimes people feel like, well, I don't really stand for something,
Yeah.
but that doesn't really mean that you're standing against anything
Right.
either.
Yeah, and there are straight up things that you just don't need to be hesitant standing up against. And so those are like, you can look at like history and see groups of people who have formed our literal world we live in now by taking a stand against things and standing for things, whether positively or negatively. But as I really like began to consider that, I just started seeing it in everyday life, like in our abilities to do our jobs well and with purpose, and the way that we relate to our closest relationships and such. And just recognizing that this reality that like we are almost like these mindless, just like robots now going through the motions, rather than operating with this sense of really clear conviction of like your humanity, your individual soul, your individual calling, your individual purpose. And I think that people's lack of those things is what kind of has gotten us into this like grayscale area mess of like whatever happens, because the only people we really let control things are people who are controlling for their own agendas. And so it's not necessarily a political thing. I have a really heavy sense that like a lot of the reason that our culture specifically is where it is because men have stopped knowing what it means to be men, and like across the board. And so both from like a primal behavioral sense, but also just from like that sense of like conviction and that sense of pride of being the caretaker and the caregiver, to be the protector, to be the one that really takes their like tribe, their family, their community, whoever they have a responsibility of leading, and leading them through it with purpose and leading them through it with conviction and character. And I think that I've just done a lot of thought and a lot of reading, and just trying to intake a lot of information and process how I feel. And this whole idea of being more human is just kind of where I landed, of going like, man, I think that if we all would just lean more into what that means for us as an individual, like things would start looking a lot different. We would stop just tripping from one thing to the next, and we would start purposefully moving through life and not letting things just happen around us and throwing our hands up and being like, nah, it just is what it is. Like, you know, and so it's just wanting people to take back control of that, and like to understand that you don't have to just be like a product of your circumstance, and culture doesn't have to just be a product of failure after failure and circumstance after unfortunate circumstance. Like, you really can do something differently, at an individual level first, and that continues.
Well, and I like, you know, on an individual basis, we have to fail.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that kind of becomes in this being more human, is understanding failure is a good thing.
Yeah.
Like when you're running down a hill, right, and you're tripping, you run so that you don't fall, right? But what do you do when you get to the end, right? It becomes flat. How do you get back up the hill, right? It's like learning. You know, Wayne Gretzky has a quote. He says, "You miss 100% of the shots you never take. You'll never know unless you shoot." And I feel like that's.
I had no idea that was Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah, it's Wayne Gretzky.
I probably just attributed that to probably Michael Jordan, just to be honest with you.
Yeah, Wayne Gretzky. But it's an awesome quote, right?
Yeah, it is.
I believe in society we're taught that failure is a bad thing. You know, you posted on Instagram, I think.
Yeah, failing forward
yesterday.
Yeah,
and you failed 8 times.
I failed a lot of cleans.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, like that's okay, and we learn and we grow, and then we move forward.
Yeah,
and so
for sure.
So you kind of have this idea about, you know, writing a story with our lives, and like how do we write out that story, and just kind of walk us through that. Like what's the idea behind that?
Yeah, I think that I know that once you're dead, you don't really have the opportunity to rewrite your narrative. And so you don't really have control over who writes your narrative once that has come and gone. You could obviously write a biography and, you know, drop it and leave it for when you're gone, or an autobiography. Yeah, my bad. And leave it. But even at that point, it's going to be up to people's own impressions, or perspectives on what you say and what you communicate. And so, I want to live with this like sense of urgency and this sense of like fervence that makes it really clear what my story was. So that it's super hard to manipulate it or convey it any differently than what it actually was, which was that like I did these things, I believed these things, I stood for these things, that like, you know, whether it be faith and family or, you know, impact in the community or just whatever it may be, that I have a clear heading on the direction I want to go, and I want that to be the story that's told about me. I wrote something even recently just about this idea that I want to even multiply what exists in me in the right ways, not necessarily trying to create clones and not trying to make other people like me, but I want to offer to others what's inside me, so that when I stop, most likely because of being dead, like when I stop the story keeps going just as if I were still here. Yep. And so just that sense of continued like multiplication and impact outliving yourself. And so you don't have a lot of control over who writes your story. You don't have a lot of control over who tells your story. And so just make it so abundantly clear what it is so that it's easy to write, and that almost anyone could do it. Like anyone could tell of like who Phil is and what he did with his life. Anyone that knew you, rather than, dude, I listened to a podcast recently. The Art of Manliness is the podcast, and it's so good. And he had I think a war ethics professor on the podcast as a guest, and she made the statement that living a life with like the sole purpose of not breaking the law is a really ineffective way to live. That compliance with the law doesn't make you a good person. And she was like, that's just such a low standard. And I resonated with me so much of going like, oh man, like if that's the story at the end of at the end of life is like, well, you never really did anything wrong. You never, you never did anything like too whatever, like, no, like you stood for something, like you made an impact, you made a difference. And it was about something bigger than yourself. Like that's the story that I want to be written into, and to be a part of. And so like, it's just understanding that like, you don't really ever know what kind of impact you're having. And it's something I say often is like, the thing is never the thing. So like the class you coach is never just the class you coach. Yep. The conversation's never just the conversation. The time you spend at home is never just the time at home. Like you don't know what is going to happen outside of that in terms of a larger impact. So just operating and living with that mentality of like, I'm always pinning parts of the story here. Or providing an opportunity for somebody else to pin parts of my story by what they're watching. So,
I mean, we're all just, it's so funny how we're all living these cohesive lives, and it's like, it's kind of like intertwined, right? It's like, like you talking about like a story, I think about like a book and you have chapters but then you have like, the back of the book tells you like it's like a Reader's Digest, right? Like on the back of the book.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of think of like when you're talking. It's like, what is that one paragraph? If it was going to summarize your entire life, what do you want that summary to be? Because it's only going to be one paragraph.
Yeah.
And that's what people are going to, people are not going to remember this like long book, right? It's like when you read a book, I mean, maybe it changes your life and you've done things, but you remember certain points. Like I remember reading a Tony Dungy book that he did an autobiography. And like I remember like key points. I don't remember the entire book, but I remember these like key points in his life. And it's like, like you said, it's like you want to become the story that you will want to be shared, right? Because when you love a book and you love a story, you just want to share it with everybody else.
Yeah, and I mean it's just I feel like bad for the people who don't really care much about history, whether that be like political history, but mostly just what existed before you kind of history. Just because you can learn so much from it. And it's the people whose stories are written down with their successes and their failures that help you go like, all right, like, cool. I can gain from that. I can learn from that. I can take from that. And so like, I guess just kind of like a final thought on this point is I'm continually recalling lessons that I learned from my grandfather when he was still alive that I didn't know I was learning at the time that are teaching me now. And so, I probably appreciated them at the time. I respected them at the time, or I was completely ignorant to them at the time. But now I realize just from having been a part of his life, what I learned and what I benefited from, and recognizing now, like he was the type of person worth emulating. And he passed away before I was like really old enough to have like super intellectual, potentially disagreeable conversations. Yep. But I still knew what he stood for, most importantly, and I knew things he stood against. And one of the cool things that I remember him wrestling with whenever I was in like mid-teenage years is like, because of his generation, I remember watching him wrestle with this idea that like the ingrained mentality of racism wasn't okay. And he kind of just stumbled into that because of his culture and his where his life term fell. It just made sense to operate with that sense of like racial injustice and racial unfairness. And I watched as I had friends who were black, and as my family was close with black families, and it wasn't even really considered by us, and we didn't even really think about that being a thing. And I watched him wrestle with that and go like, you know what, this thing that I have thought for so long isn't okay, and it's wrong. And even at like the late stages of his life, watched him change his mind whenever he realized he needed to, which is something I really respected about. And so all that to be said is I wonder how many people are being developed now like him, like, or are we so, is my life going to be worth that same impact, near the end? Or like will people say about me that like, well, I don't really know what I gained from him. Like, I don't really know what I learned from him. And so just kind of operating with that deep sense of like respect the impact that you're able to make. Because that's really the point of why you're here, right? You're not just here to consume. You're here to create at the same time. So, I think that's the idea behind that.
Love it. I love it. That's you're never too late or you're never too old to change your decision.
Yeah.
And to change your mind. And I think right now, people are having a hard time understanding that you can change your mind and it's okay.
Yeah, the number of people, dude, that are just like, yeah, I disagree with that, but like, what else am I supposed to think? Like, seriously? Like, figure it out, you know? Like, do some critical thinking and don't just think what you're told. And don't think the culturally popular thing, you know, and that I've just seen that across the board in so many conversations. I'd like to do something different, but I just don't know what that is. Like, well, it's not gonna do you any good just to keep like doing the same thing over and over again. Like, nothing will come from that. So yeah, I agree. It's not too late, and in fact, it's even worth celebrating and respecting even more for you to have to dig so deep to turn the other way.
Exactly.
So yeah,
exactly. That's it's a great segue now into like, what is humanizing? Like, what is, you know, the idea of humanization of others? How, like, kind of like walk us through that for a second. Kind of like, what is that, and then how does that play a role? And like, what role does that play in being more human?
Yeah, for me, I have realized that I operate very like narcissistically, even on accident. That I realize that my interactions with people on a consistent basis, whether that be virtually, like especially right now, virtually, or in person, face-to-face contact, that if I'm honest, I will give more effort, energy, and time to people who can in return elevate my, you know, station more. And so it is literally placing more value on a human being who can give me more than it is another human being who maybe can't offer much. Which even that statement in of itself is dehumanizing, as if you have more or less to offer because of
what you can
status. Yeah. And so it's just living like outside of that mentality and really going to war with that thought process that like people have different values placed on them. And it's just not true. Like, when anybody looks you in the eye, you're looking into the soul of another human being. So one of the books that I was reading, and I had a lot of people like afraid that I was changing my faith because I was reading the Gita, which is like Hindu scripture. Yeah. And that's another topic for another day. I'm not. I just like to learn. So there's a portion in that talks about a huge portion of what it means to really be an individual, to be a person, is the value at which you see others. And it uses the phrase that you begin to see and feel, because it's a wartime book, and you begin to see and feel the arrows that other people take as arrows that you take. So like, when you're hit, I'm hit. So it's the biblical concept even of you weep with those who weep and you rejoice with those who rejoice. And for me, I've just recognized, I think at a cultural level, that we're willing to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. We feel for those who feel. We're empathetic to certain people we decide are worth it. Yeah. And that's just like at its core, like deeply wrong and deeply inhumane.
And it's a natural thing, right? Like,
it is. Yeah.
It's like we've been programmed.
Yep.
This way, and like fed and funneled,
and it's frustrating. And I mean to that perspective, I, outside of even just this issue of humanization, we have been fed and we have been funneled and we have been whatever by culture and society and whatever influences, to where to be human is to unplug from the freaking matrix and like live purposefully again. Believe what you believe, not what you're told to believe. Do what you know is right, not what culturally makes sense. And so I don't remember, like, is it in the Matrix? It's an old movie now. Oh. But like the blue pill or the red pill or whatever, it's like take one and just become a part of the system, take the other and go against it. Like, it's so worth going against in order
for sure.
to make an impact, to make a difference, and just to feel intact as a human being, like to know that your soul is intact, not because you're perfect and not because you never failed, but because you are at least living on purpose for something. And so this idea of humanizing, I think, is where we have to start, of going like the person who can offer you nothing and the convenient celebrity relationship that you accidentally developed are of equal value. And that's not necessarily theoretical for me. And so I began to see that even our first guest on the podcast is going to be Noah Olson, who's second time fittest man, longtime games athlete. And we got an opportunity to connect, and I began to see how I was even like wanting to leverage that relationship for my own benefit. And it was dehumanizing him. And that's not cool. And so I wanted to really evaluate that and really go to war with that mentality, and just go, the person at 7:30 p.m. that I coach in the gym is of equal value and is of equal importance. And they have a soul like everyone else. And so that's what I think the humanization factor is at a personal level. I think on a big picture level, it is at the core of like our greatest crimes as humanity, because historically we have an ability for empathy at a personal level much more so than at a group level. Yeah. So you can feel empathy and sorrow and pain for the family who lost their grandmother due to coronavirus, but somehow we look at the stats and we see them as stats and not people. Rather than having the ability to operate with that like cognitive awareness that, okay, to that same situation that was that one family and that one grandmother, you're talking about hundreds of thousands now, but you want to push your political stance instead. You want to push your opinions and your agenda instead. It's not cool. Like, what's cool is to consider people first. And I mean, dude, it's at the root of even the Holocaust. The number of studies and the amount of research done post-Holocaust about people's ability to operate with empathy towards it is pretty staggering. Like what people are willing to look past when they won't look at it, when you won't actually look at the true like hideous nature of what slavery is and what obviously something along the lines of genocide is. When you won't look at it, you have obviously a much easier time looking past it. And so we've developed as humanity this great ability to just turn our heads the other way. And it's so damning to so many things.
It's like that hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. You know, it's like if I don't know what's going on, then I'm not held accountable.
Yeah.
Does that kind of like make sense?
Yeah, which is a load of crap. Like you're held accountable because you're alive. And you can do something.
Now, we are held accountable to a certain standard of what we understand.
Sure.
But it's like you can't just walk through life, you know, with your eyes closed.
Yeah, you don't want to get to the end of life and it just be said about you that like, well, you never really stirred anything up. You know, you never really like.
You never caused anything bad.
Yeah. But what did you do?
But did you?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, humanization at this like global level of, man, like I am all in on shining the spotlight on Black Lives Matter right now. And for as long as is necessary. And so, because again, like it's just that concept of all lives won't matter until Black lives also matter. Not but with that is just this idea that my frustration with myself first and then with people around me is, yes, we have hopped on a cultural bandwagon at the moment, and we have picked sides because that's what we do. But I think the frustration is for me, I care because it's spotlighted, yes. How do I continue to care beyond that? Also, there's not a lot of validity to my care towards that particular issue until I begin to validate and care about the same kinds of injustice happening off the grid. And so like to the same level that we're fired up about racial injustice right now, we should operate with the same sense of conviction over child trafficking, over modern day slavery, over bullying. Like, and I know that those have different tangible impacts, but at a core level, it's our ability to look the other way. And you can't fix all of those issues, but you can do something. And
you can do something, but and that's what people don't understand, is bringing awareness is doing something. It's something I just want to tag on here. It's like in the scriptures, it talks about, the shepherd leaving the 99 to get the one, and it's not like shepherd leaves the 99, and the 99 are like, am I not important?
Yeah.
He's like, no, you are important, but guess what? You're not as important as this one that I need to go save.
Right. And all the 99 are also the one. Like at some point, all 99 are the one. And so
it's just a different time.
Yeah. And, for sure. Yeah. And it's like the whole concept of like, that meme that was going around of like, these three cartoon characters, and like one was on the ground with a broken leg, and somebody was trying to help him up and saying, to the other one standing there, go get help. He's broken his leg. And the one that's standing there watching refuses to go get help and just says, yeah, but what about my leg? And he's standing there totally fine. And it's just like this narcissistic sense of not seeing people for what they are, which is people, with souls and more than the five senses, And so I really do think that it is at a core base level, like where we miss the mark so often. And because it's at a global level, but then it's also in the ways that we interact with each other on the day-to-day basis as well. So just leaning into that idea of like, what would change if we began to see people for the worth that they actually have, so.
Love it. So kind of to wrap this up, uniquely we are human, right? And it's that word, uniquely.
Ooh, ice cream truck outside. We don't need ice cream. We're healthy.
And it's like us being uniquely human. Oh, I eat ice cream sometimes. Let's be honest here. What makes us uniquely human, right? And like what separates us from other mammals. Yeah. Tag that last little bit, right there to kind of end on. Mm-hmm. And that kind of starts this next episode.
Yeah. So there is that kind of just alluding back to what we said at first. There is the theory that like what separates us from other mammals is our ability for higher cognitive reasoning.
Don't touch the plate because it's hot.
Yeah, but at the same time, like again, what's so weird about that is like that has mostly to do with size, like size ratio. So the size of your brain in ratio to the size of your body is just larger than other mammals.
Yep.
And so brain size it's just weird that is the primary like factor to be considered. And I kind of refuse to believe that the thing that makes us human outside of animals is just that coincidence that our brains are larger. Like I think that it's more than that. Yeah. And I think everybody would argue that it's more than that there is an existential sense to it. There's something deeper. There's something outside of the five natural senses that exist inside of us. And also to that argument, animals have also evolved and devolved, I would argue, in a sense. And so like in the same way that, our house dogs, our tamed house dogs are not necessarily the same as their primal ancestors. Neither are we. And in some ways that's okay, and in other ways it really isn't. And so like I want to get into that a little bit, but in the same way that animals have evolved, like through modern research, there are plenty of species of animals and different types of mammals that have proven an ability for higher cognitive reasoning. And, a big argument is, well, humans are different than animals because they can speak. There's language. Well, through also like research and study, so do animals. Like
you never seen the documentary Blackfish?
Yeah. Cool. I mean, it's crazy.
Different dialects with different way.
Yeah. So it's just
crazy.
It's a pretty weak argument
for sure
for what separates us from animals. I agree that like clearly there is a cognitive ability separation, but there's got to be something more than that. Animals, like the survival of the fittest is the ability to reproduce primarily, and like we have that as well. And we eat and we sleep and we operate off of instinct, but there's something about us as human beings that wants to live for more than instinct. Like we want to live our lives beyond instincts and operate out of identity, I guess. So it's like, I guess that's the primary thing, is human beings have a sense of individual identity that really should take precedence over instinctual living. And
It's
that
like,
identity
it's like a
is,
name tag.
Yeah.
Like, this is me.
Yeah.
Like, this is who I am. Being flesh and bone does not make me who I am.
Yeah.
It's just purely just a
Yeah.
vessel.
Yeah, because a human is what you are, but what makes you human uniquely is who you are.
Yeah.
And I think it's just getting into that a little bit. And I want to, we'll talk about fun stuff, as well, just because I do think that, we've lost a little bit of the rigid, hardcore nature of what it meant to be a human being. We did not used to be as vulnerable and as soft and as weak as we generally are.
And that's going physically, mentally,
Yes.
spiritually,
Yes.
all avenues.
Yeah.
That's not speaking just
Yeah.
weak, we're even talking weak-willed. We're talking
Yep.
all avenues.
Yeah, you didn't really even have the opportunity to live with a sense of community weakness. You had to live in community with people, and you also had to live selflessly in a sense, because you start living selfishly, and you starve. And so it really is having some fun conversations, getting into the primal nature of what it means to be human, getting back to that, and then connecting it to health practices, to fitness, to nutrition, to different things like that. Because how if we still lived in a primal nature, really our job wouldn't be super necessary as CrossFit coaches.
Nope. We'd all be fit.
Yeah. And so so it's having those conversations just about what the primality of health even means as well, and then just bringing in some guests to have those conversations as well of that. But I think a big piece of it is wanting to bring on a number of Black athletes from the CrossFit community and just listen and learn right now, because of that issue of humanization. Racism is one of the most inhuman things that we could do. And so they just want to learn and listen and have those conversations as well. So I'm excited about the episodes. I think they're going to be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of learning. So
get
out your pens and papers.
Yeah,
no doubt. You're going to want to jot some notes down. Yeah. I know we definitely will be. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think that, we don't know what order we're going to do all these in yet, just because we don't know as guests come on and off. But you and I will have a number of the conversations, and then we'll get to have some virtual conversations with some different folks as well. And I think ultimately the idea here is that we want to help people walk through that process of what it means to start living with a sense of identity over a sense of just instinct. We want people to take the pill that goes against the grain. Yeah. We want people to unplug and start living like it matters again. And one of the most frustrating things for me is just watching people sell out, or not stand for anything, or just to not even really know what they think or they believe over things that really, really matter. And so just this idea of can we walk people through this process of knowing what it means to be individually them, to have that name tag that's specific to them, like you said, and to know what it means to not be bought and to not be tamed as a human being. So I think it's gonna be fun.
Love it. Well, thanks everybody for listening today. Yeah. We'll be back soon.
See you guys.